Hi class, we're now slowly moving on from selection to cover the rest of the key domains in staffing. Today, we're taking a big picture view at recruitment, how we get the right people to apply for jobs, persist through the selection process, and hopefully accept our job offers. When most people think of recruitment, they think of job postings like this one, looking for someone to go back in time with them. Or this one looking for a cab driver with a criminal record. Yeah, so this lecture will talk about job postings as just one form of external recruitment. Yeah, but we'll try to keep it big picture and cover all of these bases. So recruitment class refers to the process of attracting people in sufficient numbers with the right skills and at appropriate times to apply for open positions within the organization. Effective recruitment class will tick 3 boxes. First, it will attract high-quality applicants in good enough numbers that you're likely to find someone who has most of your required KSAOs, but not too many that selection becomes an expensive chore. Second, it gives candidates a positive experience so that successful job candidates are more likely to actually accept the job offer and be excited about the job, but also to not piss off unsuccessful candidates, and we'll get to that more in a bit. This relates to the third tick class. Recruitment is an opportunity to strengthen the brand of your employer. Yeah. Class, note that we have framed recruitment as a response to open positions within the organization. But let's get real, recruitment is only one of many possible options when you're faced with staffing demands. In fact, instead of recruiting workers, you could always outsource the job, pay someone overseas less money to recruit someone to do the work. The role could also be reorganized for gig work and done by a rotating and constantly shifting crew of contingent workers. Lastly, you could always expand an existing employee's work role, usually loading them unfairly with tasks outside their job description without necessarily paying them more. So these are all genuine alternatives to recruitment that do occur in organizations, and all 3 options are likely to be cheaper, especially considering that the cost of recruiting staff can vary between half to triple their annual salary. The cost of replacing even a call center worker 10 years ago was like $12,000 each, so it's likely to be even more expensive now. So, class, I'm not going to comment on which approach is better, which of these 3 alternatives to recruitment or actually recruiting a new employee. Now, I personally believe that HR, business, and entrepreneurs all have a moral imperative to offer high-quality work and to not break promises to their workers. I could tell you all about the harms of work intensification and casualization, burnout, and so on. But the reality is that many firms do use these practices in their business model and are wildly successful anyway, at least in the short term. The approach here ultimately is going to depend on the organization's business model and what employees and the general public are willing to stomach. Now, let's turn to the recruitment process. The first step is to work out the applicant population. What sorts of people do you want to apply for your job? Where are these people located? How can you reach them? Next, we begin the recruitment process, whether through job postings or referrals or anything else, and then we start to get applicants coming in. Once these people have applied to your organization, they become the applicant pool. The applicant pool has self-selected into the application process, and they begin to undergo the screening aspect of your selection process. After the initial screening, you end up with the selection process in earnest. All the stuff we've talked about the past couple weeks, and we now refer to the applicants as job candidates, and we're trying to pick amongst job candidates. After you complete the selection decision-making process, we start making offers to the job candidates, and they now become hires. Rather, if they accept the offer, they now become hires. Now, some key distinctions to point out, class. The applicant population refers to all potential hires, yeah, whereas the applicant pool refers only to people who have actually applied, yeah. So, if someone could have been interested in your job but didn't apply, they would be in the applicant population but not the applicant pool. Then there is internal recruitment. Internal recruitment, class, is when you solicit applications from current employees, and external recruitment solicits applications from organizational outsiders. Internal recruitment has some key advantages. First is that it offers promotion as a reward for high-performing employees and indicates to other employees that this organization actually has opportunities for career progression. So this is a very good thing. One of the most valued aspects of work is this opportunity for promotion, for career growth. We'll talk about this more next week when we get to retention and how important career opportunities are to retain high-performing employees. The other advantage is if you promote from within instead of hiring someone from outside, the promoted employee gets up to speed much faster because they already know the firm. They don't need to be quote-unquote socialized or onboarded. They already know the people they will be working with. Yeah. The problem with internal recruitment is that it creates another recruitment or staffing demand at the lower level. Yeah, because you're vacating a lower level role, promoting the employee, and so you'll need to fill the lower level role that you vacated. Yeah, it can also be potentially a bit incestuous. It can keep new ideas from coming into the firm, and it's just like the same old people in the organization. Another form of internal recruitment is nepotism. Yeah, hiring friends, spouses, and relatives of high-level workers of the CEO. So nepotism originally comes from hiring nephews, hence nepo and nepotism. So nephews is where that comes from. So many of you who are currently working would know that nepotism is rife in organizations, class, especially ones that lack a formal policy on nepotism. The key problems with nepotism are obvious. These are not necessarily people who have the best KSAOs for the job and can frankly be discriminatory and can undermine the performance culture at the firm by fostering favoritism and special treatment. So on the other hand, you could go with external recruitment, and the common strategies are job postings, referrals, employment agencies, all the way through to walk-in candidates, which certainly still happens. Yeah. In this lecture, I will focus on the two most common strategies: job postings and referrals. Yeah, but of course there certainly are others like internships, can be opportunities to recruit. Yeah, but we know less about that and more about the first two because of their popularity. The best practice, class, as you can see here, is to conduct both types of recruitment. So recruit internally and externally so that you potentially reap the benefits of both approaches and maximize your chance of finding someone with the best KSAOs for the job, which once again is the ultimate goal here. We want someone with the best KSAOs, who is best capable of doing the job. Now, let's try to benchmark the state of recruitment practice over here. This is a difficult task, class, because nobody in the country has bothered to do an audit of recruitment practices since 15 years ago, give or take. So this is relatively old. Updating this audit could be a terrific potential honors project for any of you who are considering doing honors. Yeah, we need new data here. This is okay to start with, but we need updated information. So let's start with this classic paper. Yeah. Now I'll walk you through the table. The top half lists the most popular recruitment methods in 1996. Yeah, and it's clustered by white collar and blue collar workers, skilled, semi-skilled, and so on. And then turning to the bottom half, let's go through this first. So notice that the most popular approach is the job posting. Back then it was in newspapers, but by and large, it still is the most popular, whether it's on Seek now or LinkedIn. Job postings are fairly popular. As were referrals, yeah, so from contacts and friends or from your own list of potential applicants, which may in some cases be employees of your competitors. So turning to the bottom half, we see not the methods used, but what was actually successful. Yeah, and what we find is, again, very commonly, job postings and referrals tended to be fairly successful. Employment agencies were also quite successful. Now, one thing to note, class, about 10% of firms relied on cold calling people. So just calling potential candidates who they don't know and encouraging them to apply. I suspect in the 21st century, the way this manifests now is by recruiters trawling through LinkedIn to find potential candidates to hire or to poach. Yeah, LinkedIn makes all this a lot easier. So I suspect that LinkedIn has made this tactic a lot more common. Notice also, class, that blue-collar jobs tended to rely more on referrals than, or rather disproportionately more on referrals compared to white-collar jobs. This is fairly common. Referrals tend to be cheaper. And so for these sorts of roles, it is more common generally to be relying on referrals of various types and less common to rely on job postings. Now, let's compare recruitment strategies across firm size. Now, what you'll notice, class, so from small firms to bigger firms, larger firms tend to rely more on job postings. Yeah, smaller firms tend to rely more on referrals. Yeah, so notice how the percent relying on referrals gets bigger as the firm size gets smaller. Class, why do you think this is the case? Why do larger firms use job postings and smaller firms use referrals? We will return to the topic of HR strategy in small businesses versus large firms when we talk about retention next week. So put a pin on that. Next, let's move on to something more recent, relatively, this time in 2008. So here we have the percent of recruitment practice by popularity, very nicely arranged in descending order. So as before, we see that job postings and referrals are the most popular, yeah, whether newspapers, referrals by employees, so on. At the time of conducting this audit, the newest recruitment tool was internet recruitment, which, as you can see here, increased dramatically since 1998, understandably. Yeah. Now, by now, of course, internet recruitment is by far the most common approach for the majority of jobs, but actually not for all jobs. You can't use internet recruitment for everything. And I'll discuss some exceptions after a few slides. Now, class, let's go over some of the recent trends identified by ARI, the Australian Human Resource Institute, in their recent white paper. The first is the rise of job search aggregators that scrape job postings from company websites, from other sources, so companies need not necessarily post onto job boards like Seek themselves. They can have it posted by job search aggregators. The second change is that the applicant population is now much more equipped and engaged to find out things about the firm themselves. So they use Glassdoor and like the Whirlpool forum was apparently a big one to suss out the company's reputation. And of course, class, more attention is being rightfully paid to diversifying the organization. Of course, we still have a long way to go in this respect. Yeah. The recruitment industry is still thriving, yeah, with lots of recruitment being outsourced to boutique firms that are specifically for recruitment. And lastly, there is the use now of applicant tracking software to track applicants as they proceed through the selection process. So that is the state of things now, more or less. We still need to know what exactly is like the ratio of internal to external recruitment these days. Are job postings still more common than referrals? Do we still see the same trends for small and large firms? Again, these are questions for which we need to do an audit to get answers. So anyone wants to do this for their honors project, let me know. So let's now turn to the recruitment process in earnest. Stage one of the recruitment process is trying to attract interest in the applicant population. How do we convince the right people to apply? And by right, class, I'm referring to people who are willing to take the job and are able to do the job. Now, what we want is for the right applicants, right potential applicants, I should say, we want them to self-select in and submit an application. And we want the wrong applicants to self-select out and not submit an application. That makes things simpler. Now, one tricky dilemma throughout the recruitment process, especially at this early stage, is the tension between selling the job, the perks of the job, versus providing what we call a realistic job preview. Yeah, this is tough. Do you want to sell all of the advantages, or do you want to be honest about what the job genuinely entails, for good and for bad? Yeah, I'm going to talk more about this in a bit. Class, firm reputation really helps facilitate the recruitment process, as you can imagine. Yeah, Google has a much easier time finding strong applicants than, say, unknown startups or companies known to be a little shady. Yeah, these companies will struggle to find strong applicants. Some firms are simply more reputable than others, yeah? And we work these out through things like, say, employer rewards or through word of mouth, yeah? The employer brand can also attract different kinds of qualified people, yeah? Like IKEA attracts different sets of potential applicants than, say, a bespoke retail furniture company, yeah? So what we know in the literature is that there are 5 brands that employers can have as far as the labor market is concerned. You have the Boy Scout, which is focused on doing the right thing, so all about ethical practices and so on. There's Dominant, there's Innovative, focused on creativity. There's Thrifty, focused on providing a good value, and Stylish. And so the brand of the employee attracts people who are similarly minded. Yeah, and so certain employers may want to cultivate a brand that attracts people that would that they would want to hire. The other issue, class, is attracting interest in jobs that are potentially unpalatable. Yeah, so this is as many of you may know, a huge issue in rural WA. For example, finding healthcare workers for rural WA can be very, very challenging. Yeah. It's also why FIFO work pays so much. There are certain jobs where it's hard to find people who are willing, and so other perks and other approaches tend to be necessary. And this is going to be covered more directly in the tutorial activity on recruitment. So, class, let's go back to this issue of how much information to provide. Yeah, we know that recruitment officers or HR officers have an incentive to oversell the job to potentially attract higher quality applicants. But that runs the risk of A, disappointing people when they actually start the job and then they leave when it's not right for them, yeah, which creates new recruitment costs. Or B, losing out on a potentially strong candidate who would have otherwise wanted to take the job in its more realistic form. On the other hand, if you do reveal the downsides, you can win over some but maybe scare away potential high-quality applicants. It's a hard problem. What we see in the evidence, class, is generally that realistic job previews are more effective on average, but it really depends on the situation, and you still do want to strike the right balance. And of course, there are other recruiters who focus primarily on compensation. They sell potential job applicants on the quality of pay and benefits. The downside is that this tends to attract mercenaries who are likely to leave when a better opportunity comes along. So that's the risk with going with that approach too. Again, generally, you want to err in favor of being honest and being realistic about the job, but it really does depend on the situation. There are some unique considerations that go into recruitment for diversity class. Ethnic diversity in particular can benefit creativity, can aid expansion into global markets. They can also serve more effectively a customer base that's also diverse. Yeah. But companies often overlook these benefits in favor of finding someone who quote unquote fits the company culture. Yeah. Like in this Optus ad looking for an Anglo-Saxon candidate. Yeah. I honestly think that this current obsession with fitting the culture is the biggest obstacle facing HR today. Culture fit just doesn't predict the criteria that matter to organizations. We have checked again and again and again. Culture fit is not that important. What actually matters is genuinely having the right KSAOs. And many companies use recruitment to fix existing culture problems, but as you can imagine, class, no amount of new hires is going to change a messed up, problematic culture that was there from the outset. Yeah? So, what can you do to help with the diversity problem? We know that training does help, and using pictures of diverse employees on recruitment materials is also helpful. Now, class, let's talk about the two predominant approaches to recruiting from the applicant population: job postings and referrals. So, job postings tend to be done online these days. Usual places are job boards like Seek, the company website, social media, and the professional associations if relevant. This may surprise you, class, but print job postings, like in newspapers and magazines, are definitely not dead and still to be quite popular for rural, regional, and unskilled work, especially for rural and regional work. Job postings are commonly used both internally and externally for recruitment. So you can have an internal job posting too. As you would have noticed in the audits of recruitment practices, job postings are more common in large firms that hire for multiple jobs. The main advantage of job postings is that it gives you a more diverse applicant pool and is more likely to capture non-traditional applicants in the population. So it has some diversity related advantages. On the other hand, we have referrals that usually come to you through contacts and informal networks. You can also invite former employees to return to the company. We call this boomerang employment. Or you can poach competitors' employees. Yeah? Now, class, referrals tend to be more successful at navigating the selection process, so they're more likely to be hired and get an offer. They're also more likely to stick around, usually because they have a contact inside, so they have the referrer with whom they're friends or acquaintances, and that helps people stay. Yeah, we'll talk about this more in the retention lecture. And it can also benefit the person who made the referral in the first place. So it actually has a lot of benefits. However, it does run the risk of adverse impact across demographics. It tends to be common among smaller firms that can't really afford to post their jobs everywhere, and for highly professional roles that tend to have a relatively small applicant population. So, now that you've gotten you've got your applications in, whether through referrals, job postings, or a combination of the two other approaches, now you need to start screening your applicant pool. Yeah. Now you can keep applicants engaged through the selection process through frequent communication and friendliness with job candidates. Yeah. Certain selection techniques, class, like assessment centers and situational job tests, can be used to add to the realistic job preview to help candidates decide if they still want to proceed. Yeah. I want to draw attention, class, to two overlooked and somewhat tricky issues in this stage of recruitment. The first is the site visit, when the employee visits the organization or the site, the mine site, etc. Yeah, when applicants come to the organization and they meet employees for selection, for conversations, etc., it really helps, class, to have site visits that are organized and effective. A disorganized site visit that doesn't have a clear schedule, where the job candidate is like, okay, so what am I supposed to do now? Like, where am I supposed to go next? What is happening? happening, like when that happens, it can really turn off job candidates, especially if they're deciding between multiple options. Yeah, then they will be steered to the other options. The second issue that can be overlooked is the perceived fairness in the recruitment process, in the selection process, I should say. Do applicants feel that the selection process is being made fairly? Are they being treated with respect in the interactions that they have? You would be surprised how many job applicants report being asked rude questions in the interview process. It happens, class. It's happened to me, certainly. It can be a permanent turnoff for the job candidate. And I want to note, class, that I've used the word perceived here because these perceptions partly come down to the idea of face validity, which I talked about in the personality lecture, which is to say, regardless of how valid genuinely a selection tool is, some applicants really dislike some selection tools and see them as unfair. Most prominent here is the personality test. Many candidates see personality testing as an illegitimate and unfair way to choose candidates, which I talked about in the week 5 lecture. Despite the fact that personality tests are actually quite valid for many important criteria. Yeah, so that can be somewhat tricky. If you do decide to use personality tests, the best practice here is to frame it carefully to the applicant. So why is this being done? And to make it only one contributor among many in the overall selection process. Now we come to the final stage. You've put the applicants through the selection process. You've made offers to some job candidates. Yeah. Now, what determines which job candidates, or rather, what determines whether job candidates will accept your offer? Interestingly, the factors that shape offer acceptance seem to depend on the stage of the process. So earlier in recruitment, people are drawn to organizations based on the compensation and benefits, yeah, naturally, and to the organizational culture. Now, these things entice applicants to entice people to apply, but they ultimately end up being quite superficial, class. Once the offer is actually in front of the job candidate, they tend to pay less attention to compensation and more attention to the nature of the job itself. Is it a good job that they would want to have? And to other more concrete and proximal considerations. Is the company in a convenient or desirable location or city? Are there ample growth opportunities? Were they treated well by the organization during the recruitment process? And was the site visit an organized, pleasant experience? And there we go, class. I hope that this coverage of recruitment has given you a bigger picture understanding of how selection fits into the organization's HR strategy. Yeah, see you next week for our next topic on retention.